What is that up in the sky? Is that the sun? It is a beautiful Monday, April 13th, 2015, and it's time for another edition of Weber This Week. Today, a gentleman who I've been trying to get on for some time, and he's been nice enough to carve out a busy schedule to join us this morning, Judge Dennis Bender. And Judge, thank you very much for spending some time with us this morning. And I know you're a busy guy, and I appreciate you spending some time with us.
Entirely welcome. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, Judge, let's talk a little bit about yourself. I've known you for several years, and your family, and certainly you're well known throughout the Seneca County area. But for the folks that may just be tuning in and have heard you, have seen you, have read about you, give us a little background, if you would, where you were born, where you went to school, and the whole background, where you went to college, and so you bring up the viewers an up-to-date scenario of what you're all about.
Sure. Well, I was born in Pennsylvania. I've lived in Seneca Falls the vast bulk of my life, however. I moved here when I was about 12. My father was one of the Sylvania employees that was transferred here back when that mass migration happened back in the, when was that, the 60s. Mm-hmm. I went to St. Patrick's School for 7th and 8th grade, then Minders Academy. I went to St. John Fisher for college. I didn't really plan on going into law originally, but developed a taste for it. While I was there, I did some work with the Rochester Interfaith Jail Ministry. Went to law school. Got married thereafter to Mary Ann Van Cleef, who's Van Cleef Lake fame. That's her family.
There you
go.
Goes
back for a very long time here in Seneca Falls. We have 3 children, all married. We're very fortunate. They all live within 50 miles of here. They're all married, and they all have children. So we have grandchildren we enjoy. My professional career, when Mary and I first got married, we went into VISTA, Volunteer in Service to America, or Volunteers in Service to America. We're in Cincinnati, Ohio for a year, and we did consumer education and related matters with poor Appalachians. Cincinnati was really a port of entry to the 20th century back then to a lot of people. We came back to Seneca Falls. Wasn't really our plan necessarily, but it happened. I got the job as the attorney for the Department of Social Services. I left that. I went and worked for Bob Horton, worked for him for a few years. I became an assistant district attorney, went out on my own in time. So when I became the assistant district attorney, decided to run for district attorney, did that for 8 years, and then ran for judge, and here I am.
And you've been a judge quite a long time.
I'm in my 21st year at this point.
21st year.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. Certainly, obviously, you have a very busy schedule. Most judges do. As you look at your career as a judge, would you consider yourself a fair, objective judge, or there's a different scenario relative to describing judges? I have watched you during the Monday afternoons court sessions. Is there a label that you can put on yourself as far as what kind of a judge you really are, as far as you go by the law, or do you have a ability to take a look at every single case in its own right?
Well, first of all, I certainly like to think I'm a fair judge. I like to think I'm judicious. I do follow the law as I understand it, and of course there is room for interpretation at times too. Judges also have a lot of discretion on a lot of things. You're talking about coming Monday afternoons, that's when we do criminal matters, and there's a lot of discretion in sentencing, for example, that's afforded to the judge. I try and listen to what people have to say. I do sit in many courts. People think of a judge as pretty much just presiding over criminal matters. That's one piece of it.
Right.
I also preside over the family court, which is where family-related matters you would expect they are heard there, excepting divorce, which is in Supreme Court. I can talk about that in a minute if you like.
Sure.
But family court, it deals with custody matters, a lot of them, child abuse, child neglect. Kids who get in trouble, juvenile delinquents, and what they call persons in need of supervision, which are essentially just kids that are incorrigible. they go there. We also have what we call family offense matters that are heard in family court. Those are matters that might be in the justice courts otherwise for harassment and assault, but it's between people that are married or related, have some close personal connection, and they want to keep it out of the criminal courts. I also sit on Supreme Court. That's your court of general jurisdiction in New York State. It's not like the the federal Supreme Court.
Right.
It's not an appellate court. But your divorces, as I indicated, are heard there, as are, negligence matters. If you had a medical malpractice case, it would be there, or any kind of malpractice case, contract disputes, somebody suing somebody, slip and fall type things. That's all in Supreme Court. Finally, I do surrogates court, which is where estates are addressed, and trust matters. Not a lot of the litigation there, but a lot of paperwork in that.
One of the amazing parts that I've always enjoyed is the interaction between yourself or any judge and the attorneys. I'm sure you could write a book about your interaction with attorneys. I have watched them get up in front of you and make arguments, and you're very dutiful. You listen with intents. You sometimes don't agree, and sometimes you might agree. How has that flowed over your years as a judge, the interaction with attorneys? Is that pretty stable, or have you had some, I don't want you to talk about major stories, but it's always been a marvel of me how attorneys can address you and how they handle themselves, and I'm sure sometimes they get out of control and you have to bring them back to point blank because you are in charge.
Sometimes, but most attorneys, they handle themselves well in the courtroom. Being on the bench as long as I have too, I do get attorneys I've never met before. That's not entirely uncommon, but there's kind of a core group there that I deal with regularly.
Sure.
So I know the personalities. I know what to expect. I know how to deal with them, and frankly, it cuts the other way too. I think they know how to deal with me. I know what to expect out of me.
And that's a good thing, you know. And when somebody carries a point too far, you bring them back to the reality of we got to move on. I've noticed that.
I have cut them off at times when they are digressing or just going on too long.
Speaking of attorneys, I talked to a few of my friends who are also fans of the court system and threw a couple ideas to me to mention to you. One thing that always amazes me is when I sit as a spectator on Monday afternoons, when I can get up there, public defenders, an interesting part of the system. As we all know, it's a constitutional right relative to if you can't afford an attorney, one will be provided to you. I see them come into your court. I see them with big stacks of documents and folders on each of their clients. And I've noticed many times where you'll say that you will find a public defender for a particular client. Does that become a workload issue in your mind with what we have currently in Seneca County? Is it okay right now as far as the ability to do a good job with each of the clients? That's always been an interesting point of me. Is that something you look at as far as, hey, I'm going to give this gentleman another case, and does he got too many cases to deal with?
Well, first of all, we have a public defender's office in Seneca County. John Nabinger is the attorney out of that office who handles most of the felony work. He will take a case unless he has a conflict, or if something came up that it was an incredibly complex case, he might request to have somebody else appointed who could give it more time than he can. Now, I don't mean to imply with that John doesn't do a good job. He does a very good job with people. I think he handles his cases well. If something deserves to be tried, he certainly will take it to trial. He will advocate for his client, which is exactly what his job is. If it looks like the case is a real loser to him, he will advise his client accordingly, and if there is a plea offer made, he'll suggest to them they may want to consider it. Analysis, though, it's always down to the defendant whether or not they want to go to trial. That's a decision they make themselves. The system works pretty well, and we have a number of attorneys that'll take assigned cases when there's a conflict, which is the general reason for assigning another one, as compared to just a particularly complex case.
You mentioned about, before we went on air this morning, Judge Dennis Benner is my special guest this morning here on Weber This Week. You mentioned earlier about a couple of things that marveled me with the 21st century thought. Amount of paper that you deal with, amount of folders that you deal with on a weekly basis, and I'm very observant about that. I see the attorneys come in, they got these major files with each, got their little folder on each client. Is that something that may someday go away and you'll be dealing with just computers?
Well, In some courts, it's getting to that now. The surrogates court, all petitions and the like are filed online.
Okay.
And while there may be paper, everything is scanned into a computer at some point, and it's kept that way. The criminal cases, you tend to generate more paper and keep paper. They're not scanning them at this point. May happen someday, but it's kind of a different animal, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Supreme, I think, will go to the electronic filing and that. In fact, they are doing it in some courts now. We're moving towards that, just overall. Attorneys themselves, as far as them keeping records, attorneys, I think, are pack rats by nature. So they tend to hang on to things.
What interesting comment you made to me, just to our audience. Judge Dennis Bender's with us this morning on the show, and one element that has always intrigued me is that's the plea deal.
Mm-hmm.
Explain to our viewers specifically, a defendant is accused of a particular crime. Who makes the plea offer? The prosecution goes to the defense attorney and says, I'm going to give you a plea offer, or how does that work?
It's the prosecutor, and in my opinion, it strictly should be the prosecutor, because the prosecutor is the one who determines in the first instance who's going to be prosecuted and for what. They have tremendous power in that regard.
Okay.
In fact, I remember an old judge saying to me one time, in a lot of respects, the district attorney in criminal cases is a much more powerful position than the judge. The judge will ultimately sentence, but he doesn't decide what they're going to be charged with.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't make them charge it, other than if you don't like what they're doing, you could vote them out of office.
Right.
But they use their discretion. They're supposed to. That's part of their job.
Can a defense attorney go to a prosecutor and ask for a plea deal?
Oh, certainly. On the very lower level, that's done constantly. People get traffic tickets. Their attorneys are constantly requesting, how about, you know, letting my client plead to whatever.
The argument on the other side, is there an argument on the other side for a criminal plea offer? And I understand the reason for that, to move the court system quicker. Because if you didn't have plea deals, you'd be really burdened, I would assume. You'd have tons and tons.
There certainly would not be time to try every case.
Exactly.
No.
What do you say to the people on the other side of the fence that say, I go to you and ask for a plea offer, you agree with it, the person has been alleged to have committed a serious crime, and the offer is made, you approve it, and a sentence is passed on by you. On the other hand, if a plea offer was not on the table and it went to a jury trial and the person was convicted, then they would get in front of you for the sentencing ultimately.
Yes.
But the theory being from the person talking to me before this show would be, in most cases, you would probably, just guessing, pass on a more serious sentence than a plea deal would have given them. Is that a fair statement?
It plays out that way, but the reasoning behind it's what you got to look at.
Okay.
When a plea offer is made and the judge gives a sentencing commitment, says, if you plead guilty, I will give you this. It's more than just saving a trial, if you will. It's an acknowledgement of responsibility by the person. If they go to trial, and they're certainly entitled to exercise all their rights, but if a jury, their peers, determines they're guilty, well, that person fought it tooth and nail, they're guilty. It's not a case where, it's an innocent person being prosecuted. At that point, as a matter of law, it's a guilty person who was convicted. So they don't get the consideration for accepting the responsibility.
Very interesting. Well, we're talking to Judge Dennis Bender. When we come back, I want to ask him about the shock camp, the shock treatment, as far as the program that he would send people out to that. How does that work in his mind? A lot of people have asked me to ask him about that. We'll get him and talk about some of his staff, give some plaudits to those fine folks. This is Weber This Week on Monday, April 13, 2015. We'll be back with the judge after we hear from our great commercial sponsors. Cayuga Lake National Bank. Bill Ryan and his team for all of your banking needs. Offices in Union Springs and Aurora. A fine sponsor of this show for over 30 years. DA Liquors, Seneca Falls. Amy Padula and her great team will find that right spirit for you every time. Tell Amy the dog sent you. Steve Wadhams, Wadhams Enterprises, your employer of choice. Proud supporter of this show and local athletics. Bob and Leslie Oman, owners of the Oman Theater in Lyons, as well as the Newark Pilots, a minor league baseball team with a major league ballpark. SenecaFallsCountryClub.com. Awesome 18-hole layout, offering a 12-month payment plan. Wilson Press, WPress.com. Seneca Falls. Rich Ricky, my good friend, and his team can handle all of your printing and mailing needs. Welcome back, everybody. It's H. Weber with you on a Monday morning. It's a gorgeous week scheduled ahead. Like I say, we're talking 60s, a lot of sun, maybe one day in the 50s, but still, it's going to be a glorious weekend for what we've had going through the last several months in the winter scenario. I was telling the judge coming up the elevator, going down, or whatever we went. I'll tell you what, folks, this was the worst winter in my time, and the judge agrees with me on that. So we had some good, miserable winter. I tell you, Judge, it was a tough one, but we all got through it, and now we got to get some sunlight and enjoy the outdoors.
Get a little color, too.
Let's talk about the shock camp. Is that the correct term, shock camp?
Are you talking about the Willard program?
Yes, the Willard. Yeah.
Okay.
Is that the shock?
Well, no. Technically, a shock camp is a different type of entity, but Willard is a unique program.
Talk about
within
Willard.
the
What does Willard do, and what is Willard's
Sure.
charge of handling?
Well, first of all, Willard is for, in the first instance, people who are what they call second felony offenders, people that are going to be going to state prison if they're convicted.
Okay.
Secondly, there are people with drug abuse problems, and frankly, that can be alcohol too. That's just as much a drug as any of the others, and while it's legal, it's heavily abused.
Sure.
They get a sentence, be it, for example, a sentence of 2 to 4, minimum sentence of 2 years incarceration, maximum of 4, and you're on parole in that meantime. But if they go to Willard, they get put on parole immediately. They have to go through the program. It's 90 days, and it can be extended for some people. They run it a lot like a boot camp. There's a lot of physical exercising with it. If you go by there early in the morning, you'll hear it.
Okay.
There also is a lot of education, and there's treatment. If they successfully complete, they are released on parole at that time. It's also used by the state when people are on parole and they violate. They sometimes will send them there rather than to send them back to a typical prison cell. And they have to go through the program, and if they're successful, they get out again.
Interesting. As far as, you mentioned drug, again, being a spectator of your court and coming up on a lot of Mondays, it would seem to me that you deal as drug issues are just abounding out of control. It seems like it, not just in this county, but around the country. That's got to concern you, I assume, because you see so many cases that involve the abuse of drugs, etc.
It does, and drug abuse is behind an awful lot of criminal activity. A lot of the cases I have are directly related, be they driving while intoxicated as a felony, that's into the county court, or it's drug possession, drug sale. We don't have a lot of heavy-duty drug dealers in this area, but there's a lot of people that sell, and a lot of what they do is just to buy drugs for themselves, too. There's a lot of heroin out there right now. Heroin's relatively cheap, especially compared to prescription drugs that are narcotics, and that's where a lot of people get started. They're abusing narcotics that they've gotten from a doctor or, frankly, have bought illegally on the street, what have you, but it's cheaper to buy the heroin. So
pretty amazing. We're going to touch on, just get a general comment, of course, a famous trial that came and I got adjudicated here in the county that you were involved in as the judge. And, of course, the Carlson trial meant a lot of interest, developed a lot of interest, I guess, worldwide. Friends of mine in Canada literally were reading about the trial. There's been other sensational trials. Just a general comment. When you have 20/20 Dateline and all these national networks coming to Seneca County and getting information every day of the trial, is that unique in your respect as far as the dealing of such an event?
I can't say it's unique anymore because Seneca's had several high-profile cases. It's unusual, though. We don't have that much. As for me dealing with it myself, I don't directly deal with it at all as judge.
Right.
I did back when I was district attorney. The press would always be shoving a mic in my face if there was something going on.
Sure.
And I don't mean that derogatorily to the press. They're doing their job too. But it's a different flavor, frankly, when you get the TV reporters and that involved. They ask much more basic questions. Local newspaper coverage I always was relatively pleased with. The reporters, they know the courts, they follow things, ask intelligent questions and not back to square one.
Right. And Mike Hibbert, who was at the court a lot from the Finger Lakes Times, was on this show a few weeks ago, and he does a nice job going around doing his thing.
He does.
Filing information on court proceedings. Let's talk a little bit about your staff. You have a lot of people. When I'm up there on a Monday, I know that Nick Ciotti's wife is a court reporter.
Gigi.
Gigi. And give us a few other names to just mention that help you exercise the court system.
Sure. Well, I have two other members of my chamber staff. One's my secretary, Joanne Ryko, and the other is Barbara Roche, who's my court attorney. And she's kind of my right-hand man, so to speak.
Right.
Barb does legal research for me. She sometimes does drafts of documents. She's a sounding board for me when I want to talk about something. I don't have the same luxury that judges, for example, in Rochester do. I mean, they're in a back corridor, they can go knock on the neighbor's door and talk to another judge. I got to pick up a telephone if I want to do that. Being a small county, we're just a one-judge county. Other support staff we have, each one of the courts has a chief. Excuse me, I'm tripping over my own tongue. A chief clerk. It's a vacancy right now in Supreme County. Liz Young, who retired recently, left us December, and someone will be hired very, very shortly on that. We've been through the interview process. We're just waiting for it to go through all the channels. Conchetta Brown is the chief clerk in the family court. She's been there for quite a while, and she has 3 people that work for her back in Supreme. There are in county, that's one court together. There are currently 3 there. Hopefully there'll be 4 in time. And surrogates has 1. There's also security in the courthouse.
Right.
So there's a lot of people running around. And since I was mentioning names back to surrogates, that would be Jane Lawson.
That's great.
She really could use some more help. We suffered a lot of cutbacks in the court system back when the financial crisis happened. And people would leave and they just wouldn't replace them.
Wow.
And surrogates, we had 2 before. We have 1 now. We probably could get along with 1.5, but we do need to get that half in there at some point.
Yeah, because it takes a lot of people.
There's a lot of paperwork involved, much more than people realize. And an awful lot going on, too, particularly in family court. There are hundreds of petitions that get filed there on a regular basis. It's a very, very busy court.
Just an interesting comment. A couple things I'm thinking about right now. When you listen to an attorney give oral arguments, and you've read the briefs, you've researched it, is there many times, percentage-wise, that you, in your own mind, have an idea of which way you're sort of tipping toward, and all of a sudden, after arguments, you may flip-flop and be considerate of something different? Does that happen often?
No, not often, but it does happen. Most times before you've had oral argument from attorneys, you've had a lot of papers filed.
Sure.
And they've been looked at it. I might look at them, and in fact, to Barbara Roche, she will check on the law and the things, and she'll give me her 2 cents worth on it. But it does occasionally happen that something will be said at oral argument that gives you second thoughts. Even if you don't change your mind, you reserve on it and think it over longer and then give them a decision.
One comment I wanted to get from you is my wife, she's got Sicilian background. She's a Sicilian girl, which is nice. It's hard to believe that we're going to have 49 years of matrimonial bliss May 7th, being a German and her being Sicilian, but we get along. And the reason we do is I'm in the other room watching sports, and she's in the other room watching QVC, so it's a perfect combination.
She'd get along well with my wife.
Oh,
she likes QVC as
well. God, Mary's, I think Mary might be one of their favorite customers, because she gets emails from them about every day about specials. The prison system, when you have to send somebody because of them committing a crime, a lot of people tell me, and I've kind of been a proponent of their theory, the prison system overall is a punishment vehicle, but a lot of people think it's too easy. They got TV, they get 3 squares a day. I don't expect not to feed people. There's a legal library, there's an exercise room. Not to get involved in this, but it seems like people have the comment to me, why should we be so giving to prisoners when it should be a punishment and there should be more stringent details? Is that something that ever comes across your mind as a judge, or a lot of people say they got it too good?
The argument's been made to me before, but frankly, my stock answer to somebody that says they think they caught them in prison would be go visit a prison.
Yeah, right.
It's just from the initial premise. You don't get to do anything you don't or that you want to unless it's okay.
Gotcha.
You are regimented your entire day. But secondly, they are not nice places.
No.
It's not pleasant living, and they're very punitive. There's no question. Now, it's not like being in some third world country that if you want to eat, your family needs to bring you food, or you're going to be thrown in a cell with no change of clothing for as long as you're there or anything. I mean, they certainly do give them the basic amenities in that, but it's not a nice place to be.
I can imagine, and certainly I have watched many films on various prisons throughout the country. The show's called Lockup, as a matter of fact. It just comes to mind. And you're right. It isn't, and people kid me about, well, why do they have to watch cable TV? We can't even get cable TV. Some of us can't afford it. Why are they entitled to watching cable? And, I mean, you hear that sometimes.
Sure. Well, there's some other things there, too. Like with TV, that's it's also a way to help control the prisoners, too.
That's right.
You got to afford them something there. But keep in mind, too, yes, they have cable TV, but it's a room with 30 other guys.
Right.
You don't get to sit there with a clicker and change the channel just because you don't like what's on.
That's right. Well, certainly I appreciate you carving out some time for us this morning. I know we touched on some subjects, and I am a big fan of the court system, and you'll see me a lot, and I look forward to seeing you do your thing and your staff, and I think it works, and I think not because we've known each other a long time, I think it's good that you came in and be a part of the interviews, to have our folks that check out this show an understanding of what's behind Dennis Bender and your theories on some of the things you've talked about.
Your remark on behind me, I just want to close with that. I couldn't do it with the support without the support I have. I have very good staff that work for me, and most importantly, I have a very tolerant wife. She puts up with a lot of me running to work and the like at times, and I wouldn't be where I am today without her.
I can't imagine what your daily schedule must be like. You go home to try to have a supper, and the phone's ringing off the hook for some reason.
That's not the case so much.
Okay.
The phone rang a whole lot more when I was district attorney at night. But
Okay.
there's always something on my mind.
Okay, I'm sure
There's
there is.
something to think about, something that needs to get done.
No.
But
Well, listen, I appreciate you taking time out.
my entire pleasure.
Thanks for coming in. Judge Dennis
Thank you.
Bender. Thanks, Judge Dennis Bender, joining us this morning on Weber This Week. And again, he was a tough guy to get here, but we got him finally, and we appreciate him taking time out. Because, again, folks, I love going up to see his court system unveil and how it works in the process. And we are living in America, and it's the way it works. And I will continue to be up there as a court watcher to see what's going on. And hopefully down the road we'll have him back in another year or so and get updates. So we thank him. By the way, upcoming shows, just to let you know, next week Rod Verke will be my special guest. Rod, of course, getting honored again by the Section 5, getting a prestigious award. He'll be in talking about the NCAAs. He'll be in talking about high school basketball at its height. We had some great teams make great runs this year. The Miners Academy girls team, the Lions boys team. I see Zach Young got Coach of the Year. He got the Finger Lakes Coach of the Year. And also Jerry Anderson, Jimmy, as well. Jerry got Coach of the Year as well. So he'll be here on the 20th. That's next week. And then on the 27th, we hope to get Dave Barnick from the South End, my old broadcast partner. He's got a lot of comments to make in regards to the world of sports. And then on May 4th, we go to the month of May. Kathy Jans Duffy, along with Jan Carasillo, will be in talking about the Trinity Church, their famous love, and they'll be in talking about the history of the Trinity Church and a whole lot more involving that great church. So we hope that you'll have a great week. The weather's going to be spectacular, and thanks again for joining myself. And again, thanks to Judge Dennis Bender for being my guest. Take care, everybody. That's a look at our show. We'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.